Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Nargis Kasyanova, and I'm Director of the Program on Central Asia at the Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies. Very warm welcome to the event on China's clean energy engagement in Central Asia, co-sponsored by the Davis Center and the Fairbanks Center for Chinese Studies here at Harvard. As some of you might know, the program on Central Asia has started a new project on renewable energy transition in Central Asia. And this project of ours originated from our interest in China's Belt and Road Initiative, in the Green Belt and Road, and in the Chinese investments in the renewable energy in Central Asia. Well, that's the focus of our event today. And we will present our very first policy memo on China's clean energy engagement in Central Asia, and then we will discuss the benefits that Central Asians can get from this growing China's engagement in clean energy, and the challenges that we might face and the potential risks. And we have a great panel for this discussion today, and I will introduce our speakers in the order I'll ask them to speak. We'll start with Yipen Zhou, who is a research fellow with us with the REDCA project. And Yipen is a graduate of the Davis Center RICA program, and he has worked with the program on Central Asia for the past 2 years. His scholarly interests focus on the historical and contemporary relations between Central Asia and Xinjiang. And after Yipen, we'll go to Dr. Christophe Nedopil, who is currently Associate Professor of Practice in Economics and Director of the Green Finance and Development Center at the Shanghai International School of Finance at Fudan University. Prior to that, he served as founding director for the Green BRI Center at the Central University of Economics in Beijing, worked with the World Bank in over 15 countries, and was a director in the German development agency GIZ. Dr. Nedopil regularly provides advisory to governments, financial institutions, enterprises, and civil society to accelerate the applications of sustainable finance. And I think it's worth noting here that he is also a graduate of the Harvard Kennedy School. Welcome,
Yes.
to the panel.
Great to be here.
Last but not least, we'll hear from Almaz Chukin, who is managing partner of Future of Kazakhstan, one of the largest private equity investment companies in Central Asia. And here it's relevant to mention that Future Kazakhstan is a shareholder in the Zhanatas wind farm, the biggest wind farm in Central Asia. Well, the Future Kazakhstan worked on this project together with China Power International Holding. Mr. Chokin has extensive experience in banking and investment, working in executive positions at Halyk Bank, Compass Asset Management, and Kazi Capital, and he's a regular guest speaker at international and national conferences devoted to issues of economic and social development in Central Asia. So without further ado, let's go to you, Yipen.
Okay,
I'll
try sharing my screen. Can you see my screen now? Okay. So thank you, Nargis, for the introduction, and thank you for organizing the event. I'm very happy and very honored to kick off our discussion today by presenting my recent memo, or maybe it's already not recent because I started writing this in October last year, right after the 20th Congress of the Chinese Communist Party, and we published this piece in March this year. Things on the ground are always changing, and I hope people can still find this memo relevant. So in a nutshell, in this memo titled China's Clean Energy Engagement in Central Asia, I discussed the challenges and opportunities presented by China's clean energy engagement. in the region, for countries in the region. And I intentionally chose a very kind of a broad and a little bit vague term, clean energy engagement, instead of a more specific term like renewable energy investment or something like that, because I think we really should have a more holistic view of Central Asian countries' energy transition strategies, as well as China's role in it. We should think about how to deal with existing energy infrastructure and how to diversify energy markets by introducing different kinds of clean energy products, right, such as low carbon transport, EVs, and energy efficiency equipment, smart grids, something like that. And China could definitely play different roles in the process. So first of all, I will start by looking at the status quo of China's clean energy engagement in the region. So as many would know, China has become a global leader in energy transition in recent years. It is the world's largest renewable energy producer, and it's also a pioneer in clean energy technologies, from electric vehicles to energy storage technologies and smart grids. The country, according to Bloomberg NEF, invested $546 billion last year in the energy transition, which makes it the most invested country in the world in this regard. And it's also a champion in clean technology manufacturing. For example, it produces most of the components for solar panels in the world. And 6 Chinese companies were among the top 10 global wind turbine producers. And also, China dominates the entire global electric vehicle battery downstream supply chain. I will share the link to this presentation later. So if you're interested, you can look into the details of the sources of the graphs. And what I want to mention here is that China's massive investment in green development is not just for domestic use. I think exporting Chinese technologies and products is at the core of China's plan to go green while remaining prosperous. The country, for example, is one of the largest overseas investors in renewable energy. And in particular, I think the concept of Green Belt and Road, developed by the Chinese Communist Party, which supports green finance and investment within the Belt and Road Initiative, has encouraged Chinese investors and financiers to pursue green investment abroad. And I think one of the key regions of China's Green Belt and Road is Central Asia. The 5 Central Asian countries' demands for energy security and sustainable development coincide with China's desire to kind of expand its green power. And now I'll just briefly look at the energy profiles of the 5 Central Asian countries: Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan. So in one word, after almost 30 years of independence, energy security is still one of the most pressing developmental challenges for each of the countries in the region. As you can see from this graph, for 3 of the 5 countries in the region, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, their energy sectors are still very reliant on fossil fuels. Especially Kazakhstan is a very coal reliant country. And for the other 2 countries, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, although they produce a lot of hydropower, their hydropower mainly comes from these large hydropower stations built in the Soviet era, which are not very environmentally friendly, as well as efficient in terms of energy use. And this graph shows that for this region in general, energy sectors contribute to most of that greenhouse gas emissions. So the region's energy and electricity infrastructure is very aged and insufficient and causes a lot of energy losses. And the aged infrastructure can neither meet the region's growing demand for energy nor contribute to climate change mitigation. And so in recent years, we've been reading news about electricity outages, as well as some other environmental crises in the region. So these challenges and also the global response to climate change have really prompted Central Asian governments to make environmental pledges and also develop national decarbonization strategies. For example, Kazakhstan aims to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060, which would be a mission impossible without really dedicated efforts. Right, especially like these countries are so-called developing countries because economic growth is still at the core of their development strategies. So balancing energy security, economic growth, and environmental crisis is really not an easy task for any of these countries. And in recent years, we've seen that China has become increasingly engaged in the energy sector, as well as the energy transition process in the region in Central Asia. And such engagement takes various forms. For example, like some Chinese companies have become top investors in renewable energy projects in the region. As you can see from there, here are some examples. And also some Chinese policy banks, such as Chinese Development Bank and Exim Bank of China, have become important financiers of clean energy projects in the region. And also many hydropower stations, wind and solar farms have been built or are being built by Chinese contractors using Chinese technologies. Apart from that, Chinese clean energy products such as EVs and other products are also making their inroads into Central Asian markets. So what we can say that although there are many other important international actors in Central Asia's energy transition, China has undoubtedly become one of the most important among them. And now I will just share my thoughts on the challenges and opportunities presented by China's such clean energy engagement. Because I started writing this piece right after the 20th Congress, as many people would know, when there were a lot of gray clouds over our heads and many things were uncertain. So I immediately thought of some challenges. And I think that one of the biggest challenges is China's economic slowdown. As we can see from this graph, since the 2010s, the growth rate of Chinese economy has been slowing down, especially in 2022 due to very strict COVID restrictions. China's economy has plummeted to one of its lowest levels in the past few decades. So this would definitely have ramifications for BRI countries, including Central Asian countries, as the overall BRI investment would drop. And that would just exaggerate some existing problems with BRI projects, such as suspensions and cancellations of some projects due to some debt unsustainability. But that said, I think the situation is not bad across all economic sectors, and clean energy is definitely a sector that we can still feel optimistic about. And there are several reasons for that. First of all, while everybody was focusing on, the leadership change during the 20th Congress, I paid most of my attention to President Xi Jinping's statement on green development in his report to the Congress. And he did clearly reaffirm China's commitment to green and low carbon development. As many would know, one reason for the success of China's clean energy sector in the past few years is China's the support from the Chinese government. And there's little doubt that in the near future, at least, the Chinese government will still will keep supporting clean energy and green development with policy and financial incentives. And I think that's the overarching factor that would affect the future development of China's clean energy sector. Apart from that, under this umbrella, one significant shift in China's economy now is the state's increasing support for state-owned enterprises, SOEs. So currently, Chinese SOEs dominate China's overseas investment in fossil fuels, while private companies are the major actors in China's clean energy projects abroad. So I think the CCP's increasing support for SOEs could mean in the future, maybe we can see more overseas investment in renewables from the public sector and more available public funding for such projects. And overall, I think future Chinese overseas energy finance flows will very likely favor renewable energy projects, because right now they are concentrated on fossil fuels, especially in Central Asia, and the kind of economic slowdown will drive Chinese investors to favor like smaller projects such as scalable solar and wind and small hydro instead of like this mega projects in fossil fuels and infrastructure, because these smaller projects are financially more feasible for them. And in one word, I think in the future, maybe the optimistic me is saying that we can anticipate a scale up of Chinese overseas investment in renewables, and that would be critical for Central Asian countries if they really want to achieve their decarbonization goals, such as scale up. And another ramification of China's kind of economic slowdown is a decrease in China's domestic consumption, domestic demand, including the consumption of clean energy products such as solar panels and electric vehicles. And these industries, these clean energy industries in the past few decades have grown widely in China, and now they are already suffering from overcapacity. And economic slowdown would just make the problem worse, right, due to the decrease in China's domestic demand. Meanwhile, Central Asia's growing demand for clean technologies makes it a very attractive market for these surplus Chinese products. And compared with Western products, Chinese products are cheaper, which make them more competitive in Central Asian markets. And the last point I want to make is that China would be an attractive partner for Central Asian countries, not only because of its cheaper products and technologies, but also because its very pragmatic approach to the energy transition. So basically, in its pursuit for decarbonization, China has highlighted the principle of technological neutrality, which means China would favor all kinds of clean and low carbon technologies in the energy sector, including clean and efficient use of fossil fuels, as long as they can help achieve decarbonization goals. So in other words, supporting energy transition and green development does not mean abandoning fossil fuels. And I think this is a very critical position for fossil fuel reliant countries, including China and Central Asian countries, because recklessly phasing out fossil fuels would have disastrous economic, political, and social consequences for these countries. And I think this principle really distinguishes these countries from more determined, or you can say more radical climate actors. For example, the EBRD in 2021 just stopped investing in upstream oil and gas. And for Kazakhstan, for example, natural gas would be a very critical energy source in the transitional period from coal to cleaner energy. And the country can't just stop using natural gas, right? So in one word, why can China and Central Asian countries be good partners in the energy transition? Because they share concerns over the kind of interlocking triangle of energy security, environmental crisis, and economic growth. And they envision a more coordinated, balanced energy system in which renewables and cleaner fossil fuels would coexist to generate affordable as well as profitable energy. So, so these are my thoughts on why there are quite some prospects for future China, Central Asia, and clean energy cooperation, despite some economic and geopolitical challenges. And that said, in the end of my memo, I also suggested that you fully benefit from these opportunities by avoiding excessive financial and technological dependence on China. Central Asian countries should continue diversifying their renewable energy markets and find a balance between in-house and outsourced green development. And I would love to discuss these issues in more detail with other speakers later. So I'll stop now, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Ivan. Let's go to Christoph. So to understand the prospects of China's clean energy engagement in Central Asia, it's very important to understand what's happening in China, what's happening on the policy front with the capacity, overcapacity, and all that. So Ivan shared a number of assumptions that we had, and some analytical points that we put together. What's your take on it?
Well, first of all, thanks for the presentation, and thanks for the invitation. Great pleasure to be here, and congratulations for this fantastic report. I read it with great interest, and I learned a lot. So we're looking forward to many more reports coming from the Davis Center. Yeah, so I can summarize this in 4 points. Where are we, and where do we think we are going, and what are kind of some of the opportunities and challenges? So where are we is, of course, that when we look at China's engagement in the Central Asia, that we have seen very strong engagement in fossil fuels over the last year. So kind of every half year, we provide an update on BRI engagement by China, so construction and investment, and it's substantial overall engagement, of course, in Central Asia. but it's mostly led by Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan. So Kazakhstan receives about 36% of the construction, 74% of the investments of China or since 2013. Turkmenistan, 27% of the construction and 4% of the investment, and Uzbekistan 18% of construction, 10%. So it's sums up to about 26 billion in construction, 12 billion in investment. So most of it is, of course, financed through loans. And this is just kind of the kind of the overall engagement. The biggest deals also, of course, very much focused on. We don't have a lot of big deals actually, but the biggest deals were a $7 billion gas construction deal between Turkmenistan and CNPC in 2021. So that's relatively recent, of course, and the 5.3 billion oil investment deal in Kazakhstan in 2013. So that makes that leaves so far about $220 million only for solar and wind. So kind of the solar and wind so far makes about 5% of China's kind of energy engagement. So only 5% of China's energy engagement in Central Asia so far has been green. So that's where we're coming from. Now the question of course, also what we're seeing, what China is doing, and I think Ivan, you showed a little bit the the December 2020 meeting when the Belt and Road Initiative Green Development Institute was established, which by now is back to the Belt and Road Initiative Green Development Coalition. So there's always movement, who is responsible for green development in the BRI. And I'm very, of course, have been engaged with them since 2019. Very published some of the key publications, and particularly the traffic light system to establish what's green and what's not. But what's interesting there is, of course, what happened last week, the China Central Asia Summit. And here was very interesting that to study what President Xi said, that we need to expand energy cooperation, he said. China would like to propose, and I quote here, that we establish a China Central Asia Energy Development Partnership. So that's good. We should expedite the construction of Line D of the China Central Asia gas pipeline. So very much focused on getting more gas into China. That's very important, China's energy independence. And then expand trade in oil and gas, also getting more imports into China, pursue cooperation through energy industrial change, strengthen the cooperation on new energy. That's very vague, and peaceful use of nuclear energy. So that was all that was said in terms of climate. The climate was not mentioned once. The Xi'an communique of the final conference is a little bit more ambitious. So that's definitely a strong support for traditional energy sources, and it was explicitly mentioned to support the traditional energy sources. Even that's almost what you said, recklessly phasing out fossil fuels. I do not fully agree with this statement. It's recklessly not supporting new financing. I think new financing is very different from phasing out. And I think what EBRD is doing is not financing new stuff. And I think if you want to meet climate goals and have a green transition, the goal is to focus on new investments that are green. And this this statement currently, of course, has more your thinking, and that we focus on brown and potentially brown over green. That is not to say that China is not very engaged. And I think this is also we are very looking always at the Chanatas wind park, not only because it's a fantastic example of an international collaboration project, because most of the BRI projects are Chinese financiers, Chinese developers, Chinese operators, and sometimes a lot of Chinese construction workers. And I think the Chanatas is also so beautiful because it has a lot more international collaboration with EBRD funding, AIB funding, and so on. So that was, I think, a very good example. It's 100 megawatt, as far as I know, and also as you showed, 100 megawatt solar park, a wind park. And yesterday they announced, or on in the aftermath of the summit, they announced a 500 megawatt wind park. I don't know whether you heard that, in Uzbekistan. So that's actually very ambitious. There's no price tag on it yet, but it was signed between the Ministry of Energy in Uzbekistan and Universal Energy, a Chinese private equity firm, and that has already invested in this region. And so I think kind of there's a lot of potential, and we can talk more about this. I think where we are right now, it's kind of what I call Panna Dragon. Kind of we have a lot of the brown stuff, we have some of the green stuff. We want more green stuff, and the kind of the challenge which you kind of also brought up, which kind of there's a mismatch. It's a little bit kind of we have to overcome a misalignment mismatch between kind of China's goals, which is twofold: strengthening exports and strengthening energy independence. So kind of making sure that China has enough, particularly imports of fossil fuels. So kind of that's what we're also seeing. So on the fossil fuels, Central Asia has a lot of opportunity to export to China. On getting more projects from China, China has a lot of opportunities to export their green technologies to very strong markets like Europe that has a very strong demand for Chinese technologies just to get their energy transition going. So of course, therefore, the competition for getting supplies, be it solar panels, be it wind parks, is bigger than probably it was even a few years ago, because Europe has kind of this very strict, like Western Europe has this, the European Union has this very strict goals. So I think that's kind of a challenge that we all have to also grapple with. I finish here.
Thank you very much, Christoph. Let's go to Almas now. Almas, you're a practitioner. You are a champion of renewable energy in Central Asia, and the Janatas wind farm was mentioned by Pen and mentioned by Christoph as kind of one of the primary examples of such cooperation. It seems that it's a match made in heaven, right? China is this champion of renewable energy technology, and they're interested in exporting more and interested in investing. And in Central Asia, we have these super ambitious plans for energy transition. We're next door to China, and the relations are so good, as demonstrated by the summit in Xi'an last week. So are we benefiting enough? And how can we use this, realize this potential, and what are the challenges, what are the risks? What are your thoughts on the matter?
Yeah, I think we are living in interesting times, because there is another turn in the situation in Central Asia and in Kazakhstan as a whole. I'd like to start first with few general comments so we understand the picture correctly. And there are two aspects to this. One is finance and another one is technology. In terms of finance, very quickly, when we started this project, and the energy projects are capital intensive, so this 100 megawatt project was $140 million. And we as investment company, we did everything. We got to the point of ready to build. We've put in a few millions, but when the invoice came for $120 million, we started looking for partners. And we found partners with EPIH for a simple reason. United States is not interested in Central Asia in general, I mean private sector, the private banks. The best you can get from Americans is go to London. We have, like Citibank will say, we have a London office of Citibank, they deal with Central Asia. Don't come to New York. There's no point in coming to New York on this. After 2008 and 2010 crisis, British banking system collapsed. French, they never invested in projects if there is no French involvement. So they basically usually follow French business. Germans, they're too risk averse. They actually never do investing. Project financing is an unknown term for them. They prefer like trade financing or something, export financing, but project financing in some distant place, forget it. Just too foreign for Germans. So basically, you're left, and it's a problem not of just Kazakhstan, but I keep saying it's all developing countries. In Kazakhstan, if you take all deposits from private people and commercial entities, you're talking about roughly between 20 and 30 billion dollars, and it's all consumed already by the local banking sector. So they took all these deposits; they're already given as loans. Plus, after the crisis of 2010, local banking sector also very risk averse. Project financing is a forbidden term for them, and it's everywhere. So you're looking first to how do you finance this, and you're coming to usual suspects like EBRD, ADB, IFC, all these guys, and a new player, AIIB. I will not discuss all of them. They're all very useful, but to different degree. And then the last piece of the puzzle is a big strategic players, like big SOEs from China, for example. They have enough money just to take it on their shoulders. Just to give you an example, with Janatas project, requirements from EBRD and AIB were so long and we were fulfilling them. So actually we got project financing after project was already commissioned. So, and how did we build the project? Basically, CPID gave us a corporate loan. So they just wrote a check for $100 million and we refinanced it like a few months after its completion of the project. But it's still called project financing. So that's where we are. And that's in general, at least from Central Asia, it looks like there isn't much of finance except the biggest players are, of course, EBRD and China probably at the moment. Now, technology. In terms of technology, especially for Central Asia, Europe and America doesn't have any chance. The equipment is more expensive. We're talking not 5–10%, you're talking 20+% right from the start. And secondly, transportation, which is usually, in our case, it's 10 to 15% of the equipment is the transportation cost. To carry stuff like 80-meter long blades for the wind turbine from Xinjiang or from other parts of China, and from, for example, from Denmark, this is incomparable. They're losing year immediately also. So I think that's two major factors. They already kind of show that there's only way to go is to cooperate with China, otherwise it makes no economic sense. Unless companies are not interested in higher return, like the project Total wants to do in Kazakhstan, probably they will bring some Vestas or whatever, Siemens, but that will be not because it's better, but just because it's not better in economic terms, but maybe just because of some kind of other considerations. So these are two factors which are like, my first training was I'm a Marxist economist, so I look first at the cost, labor, materials, and all other stuff. All other nonsense like marginal cost of something, it's for me is a little bit of psychology, it's not the economy. The next question is now about the key new developments, which are really turning everything upside down. By the way, Janatas is not the largest project anymore. We did another project in the north, where we actually combined 5 projects into one, and then we sold it to CPI, to one company, and then the other one, they sold to CPI. But it's 200 megawatt project near Astana. It's 20 kilometers from Astana. What are the new developments? First, talking about China, I want to emphasize one thing. Everybody likes to talk about slowing down growth in China as like a huge negative factor. But first, it's a reality. It's a law of physics. So you can't grow 6–10% forever, because you're coming to the slower growth rates. It's natural. But secondly, don't forget about absolute terms. This year, expected GDP of China is $13 trillion. Even if they grow at modest 5% this year, that will be $650 billion growth. Just for comparison, they add in 3 Kazakhstans this year, just in 1 year, because Kazakhstan is like 200+ billion economy. So in absolute terms, the Chinese growth is absolutely staggering, and it will continue to go so, because you are now talking about 5% of a much bigger number. And if it continues, even they continue to grow at 5, it will be quite enough, I think, for the rest of this century. Second one, I actually agree with what they said in Xi'an about this technology neutral approach, because we in Kazakhstan, for example, we suffer a lot from this, I think, knee-jerk reactions that we stop financing fossil fuels. Actually, it's to the detriment not on the environment, but it's to the detriment of the renewable sector development. How Kazakhstan can jump from 70+% dependence on coal to renewables in 10 years? There is no way. But at the same time, all traditional coal sector is dying. We have every year worse and worse situation with this, because we have technological accidents every year with this system. It is 40-50-year-old. So what we need to do, and it gives 2 benefits. We need to modernize it. We need to replace old coal facilities with some modern ones. And actually, I've been in China at their modern facilities. I saw that their pollution is lower than the gas turbine stations, for example. They're very clean, depending on how you do it. But not only this, they burn 2 times a smaller amount of coal per kilowatt hour. So when you modernize old facility, you actually help the environment, because and we will continue to do it, like it or not, but we need to do it, because the phasing out of fossil fuel dependence will take 20, 30, 40 years. It's not going to happen over a 10-year period. But what we are facing now, it's even worse than the renewables. So the financing for this project completely shut down, and actually by China as well. We had 2 projects we wanted to do in Kazakhstan. Our Chinese friends and partners said, our president or chairman, or whatever you call him, Mr. Xi, said, no more coal abroad. In China, we can still do it. Outside of China, the West is blaming us that we are spreading brown technologies. So we got a complete stop on this. And I don't know what's going to happen, but maybe this declaration in Xi'an is actually a little bit change of policy, because we kept talking to them saying, guys, for the reasons I already said, let's do it, because otherwise it's not going to happen anybody, help anybody. And it's not only finance, and equipment is also a problem now. In Kazakhstan, what I see also, that's another thing which actually worries me a little bit, confuses a lot. Kazakhstan developed very reasonable and very balanced legal system to support renewables. The projects are auctioned twice a year. The bidder who provides lowest price wins. There was some regularity and there was some economic sense in the system. All of a sudden, and I was advocate for this actually, for a few years I was saying, it's nice to do 100, 200 megawatt projects, but Kazakhstan needs also to do mega projects, gigawatt or something for strategic purposes. All of a sudden, my ideas turned upside down. So as if the top leadership of the country heard me, they signed or announced in the course of last year 4 mega projects: 1 gigawatt with Total, 1 gigawatt with Aqua, 1 gigawatt with, I think, Mazda. And 2 days ago, they announced 1 gigawatt with China, with our partner CPIH, but without WISE. So all of a sudden, in the course of 1 year, 4 gigawatt projects signed on a political basis, face-to-face meetings, no auction, no competition, and God knows on what conditions, because the existing system of setting tariffs was based on the auction, on bidding who gives better price. I'm really curious. They announced this gigawatts, but what is the cost of it? I have no ideas at the moment. And in addition, because these projects completely out of the existing legal framework, the total already been sent in the fall to the parliament, and it's still lying there unapproved as an international agreement. So it goes above the national law. It will become like an international agreement between, let's say, France or Total and the government of Kazakhstan. And then you don't need to do any other regulations. Everything should be spelled out in this particular agreement. And that concerns me. And now talking about the future, I think there are two very important factors which can be done. One is the EPANG, he showed this differences between the energy structure of 5 Central Asian countries. And actually they're created to work together. Hydro is the best balancing mechanism for coal. Uzbek gas and Turkmen gas also benefit. So basically you have a composition where gas, coal, hydro, and solar and wind, they all can work perfectly together. Unfortunately, national interests or national self-interest are at the moment still prevail over understanding the common interest of Central Asia. And there is a lot of work needs to be done to understand that you need to cooperate more, you need to understand better each other and sign long-term agreements, how you do this. And secondly, I think the Kazakhstan especially, probably it's mostly for Kazakhstan, maybe 2-3 others, should replace oil with renewables. And my view of this, Europe is too populated, too dense to develop huge renewable potential, because they're already going offshore. There is not much place or resources left onshore. Kazakhstan has huge land mass, and it can build whatever amount of wind, solar, especially in the west of the country. And it's actually located closer to Europe and the south, but here is a little bit of a competition because the northwest of China is actually has a surplus of electricity. It's difficult to help each other in this regard, but at least China and Central Asia can stabilize their system and make them very sustainable and safe from any shortages. But the future of Kazakhstan is a green energy on a mass scale. And then the question is where to sell it and how to transport it. There are two ways. Traditional, you can use, as I understand, the gas pipelines are quite okay to use for the hydrogen transportation, but it's a little bit of a future. Secondly, of course, nobody should forget about the normal power lines, which you can use with different adjustments on the way through Iran, Turkey, or other places. But the best way to use it is producing green products. And I'm talking about from green aluminum to green fertilizers to methane to other gases which are useful. So basically you can produce a lot of this green energy, pack it into something which has high energy content, and then supply the world markets with green products. That's my view of the future, how it can work out when we solve today's problems, because today's problems, in my view, are not that strategic, I would put it, because Kazakhstan currently is about 20 plus gigawatts. So another 10, 15 new gigawatts and you're done. Everything you wanted and needed for Kazakhstan is already covered. What you need to think about one step forward. So what's next for this? That's probably all of my comments which I wanted to make.
Thank you. These are great. So embedded in realities, visionary. And I mean, we can't support you more in what you said about the importance of regional cooperation. And compared to Europe, we are such a resource-rich geography, right? We have everything, and we can be so balanced and we can export and, you know, be so fine if we can kind of, you know, have enough political will, capacity to do it. Let me draw on what you said and ask a couple of questions to Christoph. Christoph, what's happening with the export of coal technology? Can we expect any change? And also, we got a question about whether we can expect a push from China, like more engagement in Central Asia in terms of, you know, clean energy investments, or more or less it will be the same. You mentioned that climate change was, you know, mentioned only once during the summit. So what would be your expectation? Oh, you're muted, Christoph, you're muted.
It's an interesting observation to kind of ask whether the China Central Asia Summit in some form or another kind of is a kind of reopening of the no coal policy. I'm very surprised about some of these kind of very positive views on coal here, and also of clean coal. China knows very well also domestically that coal is, no matter whether you call it clean and has less air pollution, still a very important greenhouse gas emitter. And I think there are strong indications that the world should not fire up more coal-fired power plants. And also from an investment perspective, we're working alongside a number of countries and also evaluating, of course, the potential of what do we do with the old coal-fired power plants that are existing, and whether it's worth kind of, to your point and to your question, investing in upgrading of existing coal-fired power plants to reduce at least harmful air pollutants. Again, the CO2 emissions are not so drastically reduced through the new technologies. Again, the air pollution is the CO2 emissions, not so much. We already see that China has always loopholes for exporting coal technologies. We had this year the closure of the Gwadar project in Pakistan. We had last year projects in Indonesia. So this exists. I think from a financial perspective, after all, I'm teaching green finance, it is very right that financial institutions are not keen in financing any coal plants because in many cases they are very much dependent on sovereign guarantees and not competitive, for the simple reason that the coal price fluctuation has increased, so the volatility of the coal price overall has increased, and countries that have to import coal then also have, of course, struggles with balance of payments and importing coal. And so the second aspect is that if you invest in the upgrading of a coal-fired power plant, that it's also not so much cheaper than just building a new coal-fired power plant. It's not easy to just upgrade a coal-fired power plant. So investing even 50 million per 100 megawatt, which would be about a third or half of the cost of a new coal-fired power plant, and expanding the life cycle of a coal-fired power plant is considered both in the Chinese traffic light system a red and therefore restricted project, and of course also internationally. International financiers would be very challenged to finance it unless there's a clear commitment and clear proof that because of this investment, there's an earlier retirement. So kind of that you're actually reducing CO2 emissions. So that is probably the only kind of way that most financial institutions, not all, but most financial institutions would be able to consider financing for an upgrade of existing coal-fired power plants. And the Chinese financial institutions right now are very cognizant of some of these kind of regulatory goals or kind of policy goals, but also of some of the some of the financial risks that previous investments in coal-fired power plants bring, that again are often not as kind of very much rely again on government guarantees of governments that sometimes, of course, also struggle to pay up because of sovereign debt issues, and they are not relying on, they cannot rely on actual revenues, also because of the promises that you have to give to investors of 20 plus, partly 30 plus % of return on investment, which is tends to be much higher than for renewables. So I think that's why also investing is so kind of risky, because again, it relies often on government guarantees. So that's kind of, there is opportunities, but I would also be, from a climate perspective, I'm very skeptical that we should go down this route.
Thank you. Can I ask a couple of questions to you, Almaz? Well, first question has to do with the return on investments, i.e., well, renewable energy projects, they are often subsidized and, you know, not sustainable without the support and all that, you know. So as an investor, right, how do you see the situation, and do we need more subsidies and, you know, kind of different forms of support, or we can leave it more or less to market? And the second question has to do with what you mentioned about these mega projects that Kazakhstan's government has been signing, and you said that the reasons you know, might not be purely economical. There is kind of this geopolitical competition going on, and clean energy is high on the agenda for the big players. Is this competition good for regions like Central Asia, or actually they are bad for regions like Central Asia? It's a mix. Unmute, Almaz.
On subsidies, I think this is first, that's an old paradigm which we can already put on the shelf of history, especially in Kazakhstan. Because in Kazakhstan, I was always joking with our guys from the Ministry of Energy, saying, guys, you're not subsidizing us. Come on. You are giving us normal price, because in Kazakhstan since 2010, government restricted growth of electricity prices very heavily, in spite of depreciation of tenge, rising costs, inflation. The average, Kazakhstan is one of the 3 or 4 cheapest electricity countries in the world. So the average wholesale price in Kazakh market is about 3-4 cents. And I said, your subsidy is basically taking us, I mean, Janata's project, to 5 cents. Which is the lowest of the world corridor. The world wholesale prices start from 5, and on average 7, 8, 9. Sometimes it's even higher. So you're just taking us to normality. That was yesterday, my argument. Today's argument is even sillier because the last auction, last fall, the winner for the 50 megawatt project solar came up with a price of 12.9 tenge, which is about 2.5 cents, which is the world record of being the cheapest electricity. So yes, there is a mechanism of 20-year offtake contract, but guys, this is not subsidy. This is the benefit for the government to get such cheap electricity. So
and
this
is
is
beneficial to you. How is it beneficial?
For us, it's not beneficial. It kills completely guys like us because we live in normal money terms. And this project is a very simple function of how much you pay for your money. You just use a discount factor and you come with negative present value of the thing. And so but we were bidding for this until I think the last bid we made 14 tenge, and then we dropped out. Because even with 14, we were bidding for a simple reason. We wanted to add 50 mega to Janatas, to existing infrastructure. It would be 50% of cost for us. So we have extra land there is good wind, we know. We just wanted to add. And that's why 14 tenge was working for us. But below 14, we looked at our numbers and yes, we are out. The reason why, for example, when I look at Mazda, Aqua, other Middle Eastern players, what they do, they are looking for replacement of oil. They are looking at it not as a investment project with a high return, but they're looking at it as basically this field with wind or with solar. In 15, 20 years, maybe you will need to do major replacement of the equipment, but you can exploit it forever. This is your eternal energy source. And nobody can compete with you in 15, 20 years. Because I said, guys, just let me recover my costs, recoup my costs in 10 years. After that, I don't need any support from the government. I can kill anybody because wind is free. Equipment is already been paid off. I can live with 3 cents, with 2 cents, whatever you want. Of course, I will not make huge money, but my project is indestructible. Plus experience, because experience also counts. With the mega projects and all that stuff, I think in general, yes, we are going to, as countries, we are going to benefit from China as an investor in this project, and as a very capital intensive. And there is no way on earth we can find this much capital in our own pockets. So, as long as it is given on this cheap terms, but on the other hand, of course, it's a little bit of you need to understand you're giving up your long-term future for the short-term immediate benefits. So that's a trade-off, what you want to do. And I just wanted to disagree with Christopher a little bit. When all these good arguments, I take them, but I like the argument which poor countries are saying. This green revolution shouldn't come at cost of the people's revolutions. If we do not replace these coal facilities, our major industries, extracting industries, metal industries, they will go up in smoke because they cannot live without good supply of cheap electricity. Next 10 years, they will die. We need to do something with coal today. The wind and solar, even if we build 1 gigawatt a year, it will take 12, 15 years just to replace half of the lost capacity. Well, economy is growing, population is growing. We cannot play games with just losing supply of energy, because without energy, the economy will die, basically. And we will have huge social consequences. So you're looking at a little bit of clean air versus the poverty and the lost income for half of the people working in these sectors. And the guys who are guilty actually should pay more than we are. This planet wasn't spoiled by Kazakhstan. Even China, they just added to it recently, but 90% of pollution was produced by first world. Africa is innocent. Why Africa should pay for this?
Well, that's been China's argument until recently. So do you understand correctly that unless tariffs go up, it will be difficult to scale up the bringing on more renewables in Kazakhstan, right? Without these mega projects that are done for other reasons, right? That are due to this global competition of the big players like China, the Gulf and so on. Is there an alternative way? I mean, tariffs understandably are difficult to raise for social political reasons.
It's a big question, and it's again, we need to go back to technology. The existing Kazakhstan system, it's basically the core of the system is a national grid. And the national grid actually cannot take more of this 50 megawatt here, 100 megawatts there. We took all this low-hanging fruit already. So now when you're actually, one of the reasons I'm a little bit a big doubter in this stuff, you're talking about putting extra 4 gigawatt next 4-5 years, 3-4 years. How are you going to do it? The national grid, as it is today, you cannot put gigawatts there. You need to build new lines. You need to reconsider the whole engineering of the system. So it will take a while. And how are we going to solve it? I think one way or the other probably will solve it, but there are so many questions. And I think in this regard, one of the key threats is we are talking about technology transfer, we are talking about money transfer, but there is a big, big void in terms of the know-how of smart grid, of new energy development, of the whole new concept is probably way more behind than technology. It's easy to buy a wind turbine, bring it here and run it. But to understand how your energy system will look like in 10 years, maybe 2-3 people in Kazakhstan understand it more or less, maybe less. So what we need to do is a lot of technical knowledge should be brought in, that know-how, and it should be discussed and done on international scale maybe as an international problem, not just Kazakh problem or Uzbekistan problem or whatever.
Thank you so much. And we went over time a little bit already. Maybe I can close this session by giving the speakers 30 seconds, 40 seconds to say whatever you want to say. They may be the key takeaway that the audience should take from this discussion. Maybe Ipen, let's start with you.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I learned a lot from this discussion because the intention of my writing this memo is kind of open up a question, open up a topic, right? Because I also made a lot of assumptions, just some observations without really in-depth research. And I think after our discussion today, I really hope we can establish the connections and keep the dialogue, and we can definitely we will definitely keep an eye on things on the ground, the changes. And yeah, I think this is an exciting start point.
Thank you, Pen. Christoph?
Well, thanks so much also for the opportunity, and I learned also a lot. Very much appreciate kind of the on-the-ground experience by Almas. It's always great to hear from on the ground. What I do hope kind of for the next phase of our thinking is to look at how we can strengthen cooperation, because I think there are many other players in the market that are potentially interested. Europe is looking at how to scale green hydrogen. Kazakhstan and Central Asia has a lot of potential to not only feed it into the grid, which is difficult in many countries, but also kind of looking ahead to kind of how can Chinese, European technology and finance providers that Almas mentioned so nicely, how can they actually strengthen cooperation, potentially also with the Americans, but again, more difficult. I think there's a lot of opportunities. So looking forward to see that come to fruition.
Almas?
First, I want to compliment Ipen that I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I'm just looking at the spelling and then trying to pick up what Nargis said. But sorry, it's not difficult for us to pick up the name immediately. As well as my name, because Japanese, for example, they cannot say L, Almas, and they don't say two consonants together. So in Japanese, I'm Arumas. But I got used to that.
Arumasu even.
Yeah. I like your report, and of course, not many discoveries for me in it, but I was surprised with a very good picture you gave. So in general, it gives a very good snapshot of everything, from big picture to what actually happened in. And today's slideshow was even better. It's giving extra. So I hope that with you, with Christoph, and maybe you come here, and of course Nargis as a team leader. So we will help to expand understanding of these problems, because as I said, technology, money important, but the know-how, what the hell are you doing, guys? Where are you going? It is important.
Thank you so much. Well, the goal of our project is to bring expertise from different places together, and I think today's event is a contribution to that. And we will have more events like this. So let me invite the audiences to keep an eye and to tune in to our next event. And very big thank you to the speakers. Thanks a lot, Christoph. I know it's late where you are in Beijing, right? Are you in Beijing?
Shanghai. It looks light outside, but
Fudan University, right?
Yes.
Sorry. Yes, and thank you very much, Almas, for joining us, and big thanks to Ipen for being such a good researcher and team member.
Thank you.